Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in our next series of rules webinars. My name is Jason Funderburg. I'm joined today by the entire tournament department, Chris Roselle, Neil Gilman, and Director of Competitions, Kirby Martin, who's going to be presenting today. Before we get started, just want to remind everyone that today's presentation is being recorded and will be posted on our website at gapgolf.org/gap-webinars. And we also encourage questions from everyone. You can ask questions in the window pane of your GoToWebinar app. Feel free to send those to us. We're going to be answering them as we go through the presentation. With all that said, I'm going to pass it over to Kirby. Kirby, we ready to get it started?
All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning on our next of the definitions of the rules of golf presentations. We kind of renamed this the lie, the stance, and the swing presentation, but those are all things that are considered the conditions affecting the stroke. And that's our presentation today. It's a shorter presentation, so we'll have lots of time for questions, and we'll break for those as we head through the presentation. So if you enter your question in the question area, we'll cover those questions as we head through the presentation. So some of the definitions that we're going to cover that are directly related to conditions affecting the stroke are lie, line of play, stance, area of intended stance, area of intended swing, relief area, and improve. Conditions affecting the stroke: the lie of the player's ball at rest, the area of intended stance, the area of intended swing, the line of play, and the relief area where the player will drop or place a ball. Each of the terms lie, line of play, and relief area has its own definition. The lie is the spot on which a ball is at rest, and any growing or attached natural object, immovable obstruction, integral object, or boundary object touching the ball or right next to it. So an immovable obstruction would be anything that's man-made, like a cart path or a sprinkler head that's right next to the ball or touching it. An integral object would be an object that's man-made, but the committee has decided to call part of the golf course. We don't get relief from an integral object. Sometimes those things might be cart paths or something like that when they're located next to a boundary fence. We covered boundary objects yesterday. Those are things like lines or stakes or fences. And then obviously anything growing or unattached natural object could be like a tree branch, growing or attached natural object could be like a tree branch that's on the tree, grass, fescue, anything of that next kind of thing. Loose impediments and movable obstructions are not part of the lie of the ball. So loose impediments are natural objects that are detached from a tree, like a leaf that's laying on the ground. A movable obstruction is a man-made object that is easily movable. In the case at the bottom here, we've got somebody removing a rake. That is a movable obstruction. Could also be like something like a bench if it's easily movable. They are not part of the lie of the ball because they are movable. Loose impediments are movable, and so are movable obstructions. The line of play is the line where the player intends his or her ball to go after a stroke. In this case, we have a lady playing from a bunker here. Her line of play is that white line extending from the ball to the hole. It includes the area on that line that is a reasonable distance above the ground and on either side of that line. So we have that little yellow cone that surrounds the line there. That's a reasonable distance for this player. That includes the line of play. For other players, the cone may be a little bit wider, depending on the shot and their skill level. And for very skilled players, that cone may be a little bit smaller. The line of play is not necessarily a straight line between 2 points. For example, it may be a curved line based on where the player intends the ball to go. So we could have a hook or a slice player. It could be a curved line for those types of players. Some players hit the ball very straight, and their line may be much straighter than the curved line. I saw we had a question pop up there. Is there anything that we need to cover here before I move on to stance?
Yep, Kirby, got one question here. So if a cart path runs right along an out of bounds fence and your ball is on the path but almost against the fence, does this mean no free relief?
Not standardly by the rules. That would be dependent upon what the committee has decided. In most times, the committee should make the decision that you don't get free relief from the out of bounds fence, and by not, let's say that you don't get free relief from that out of bounds fence by not calling that cart path an integral area, an integral part of the golf course. If the committee has not decided that, then you do get relief from that cart path. But I will point out that the nearest point of relief isn't always the nicest point of relief, and that could be somewhere you don't want to go in order to get relief from that path. So it really depends on what the committee has decided. If the committee has not made a special note that that path is integral, then you would get relief. Anything else there, Jason?
Not yet, but as they come in, I'll jump in and ask you.
Okay.
Hey, Kirby,
Yeah.
This is Chris. Can I just, so we have a situation at Bala, the course that I'm a member at, that on our 8th hole, we have a cart path that is right up against a boundary fence, and the club has made it, has made that cart path an integral part of the golf course for just that situation, so that you don't get relief from the path and don't get relief away from the boundary fence. So it is something that you are correct in, that the committee needs to make the decision on that, and the committee at Bala has made it a integral part of the golf course that you do not get relief from.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point to kind of cover why the committee would do that, right? And that would be in keeping with the thought that we don't get relief from boundary fences if they interfere with our swing or our stance. So that's why the committee would kind of do that, to maintain that level of adherence to the rules throughout the golf course by naming that path integral. Not necessarily fair if you hit it right up against that fence, right, and you get relief, and then you hit it up against another fence and you don't get relief. So that's part of the thinking that goes into that determination. Anything else before I move on, Jason?
Nope.
Okay. Stance. Stance is the position of a player's feet and body and in preparing to make a stroke. So here we have a player at Pinehurst getting ready to make his stroke, and his stance happens to be kind of in the middle of a little bush that's in the scraggly area there at Pinehurst. So it's the position of the feet, and as the yellow line kind of indicates there, and the body in preparing for making a stroke. The area of intended stance includes both where the player will place his feet, his or her feet, and the entire area that might reasonably affect how and where the player's body is positioned in preparing for or making the intended stroke. The area of intended stance includes things like the lie of the player's ball, the area of intended stance, the area of intended swing, the line of play, and the relief area where the player will drop or place a ball. So it's an interesting video there. I hope everyone got to see that. Looks like it's filtering through. Keegan Bradley in that same situation that we saw a little bit earlier, taking his stance in the bush. Does anybody out there think that he might have improved his area of intended stance by the way he entered the bush? See if we can go back and watch that one more time. Sorry, I'll get there eventually. How does everybody feel about that? I know we haven't covered the definition of improved yet, but I'm wondering if we have any questions stemming from that.
Not so far, Kirby. I'm sure they'll trickle in here and there.
Okay. Improve is to alter one or more of the physical conditions affecting the stroke or other physical conditions affecting play so that a player gains a potential advantage for a stroke. So again, we have another video here. Player takes that tree branch and tucks it behind her so that it doesn't interfere with her stroke. We have any questions or observations on the way that player entered the tree and took her stance there? Did she improve her area of intended stance or stroke? One of the things that
chiming in here, Kirby, saying that she did.
She did. One of the things that the rules state as when it comes to these conditions is that you must take the least intrusive way to enter into that stance. So if we looked at that situation, I think there's a way that she could have entered into that stance without tucking the tree branch. And if that's the case, the player would be liable to penalty, or not even liable, we would have a penalty. Now, Fortunately, in 2019 in the rules, there are ways that we can undo these improvements. And so if we saw the player do this, we talked with her before she made the stroke, hey, wait a minute, don't make that stroke yet, and had a conversation with her about entering into that stance without tucking the tree branch, she could undo that penalty because she hasn't made the stroke yet. So that's one of the new things in 2019. And most of those improvements have to do with things that we improve or improve above the ground. Anything below the ground, like we put a divot back on our line of play, we could not undo. Or maybe we smooth the sand in the bunker to improve our line of play, then that would be an issue that we couldn't undo. But in this situation, because the tree branch is above the ground, she can come out of that stance, take the least intrusive way, and head back into her stance and not be held to a penalty.
Hey, Kirby, got a question here. If
Yes.
she didn't touch the branch with her hand and used her body, is that okay?
Again, that's an interesting question. It would depend on whether that was the least intrusive way to enter the branch. So let's take a look at that video again. So in that situation with this tree branch and that tree in this specific location, I think just backing in is not her least intrusive way to enter. If the tree branches came to the ground and there was no other way for her to take a stance other than backing in, I would say yes, that would be fine. But in this situation, because the tree branches don't come to the ground and the location of the branch, I think she could have come into that stance without backing in and with moving the branch as little as possible. Chris or Neil, do you agree with that observation?
Yeah, Kirby, I would probably say that if she came into it, from the sides, either, in front of the ball moving in or from behind the ball coming in, that's probably a less intrusive way as opposed to then just backing straight into the branch and moving it out of the way. Yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah, the backing in process doesn't get you off the hook. It's an observation of what is the least intrusive, and again, moving that branch the least, and it may take a couple of times till you quite figure out what that is, and you're not going to be held to the penalty because we can undo that, right? Because the tree branch is above the ground, and we can undo that by coming out and starting over. I think is the key point there. It may take a couple times till we figure it out.
Kirby, I got a follow-up question on that. What if a branch breaks while fairly taking your stance?
Well, that's going to be a question of whether we improved or not by the branch getting broken. Does that make sense? Anything for Chris or Neil on that one?
I would just echo, Kirby, what you were talking about and what Chris was talking about is you're not always entitled to that normal stance when fairly taking your stance.
Yeah, and it might be an abnormal stance to go in the least obtrusive possible way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions there on this slide?
Nope, I think we're good to move on.
And I think we've reached the end of the slideshow. So that's the end of our presentation today, unless anyone has any further questions.
Let's give everyone just a second to filter those through. I know it takes a little bit to type them out, but just want to thank everyone again for joining us and remind everyone that this has been recorded and will be posted on the GAP website by the end of today. Just a reminder, we do have more rules seminars coming up. They are also listed on that same page. You can sign up and register for those. I know Chris is good doing the one tomorrow, and Neil will be presenting as well. Got a couple thank yous, Kirby, so I wanted to pass those along. But looks like questions are slowing down here a bit. Neil or Chris, did you guys have anything to add to anything we covered today in the presentation?
I do not.
I don't have questions either.
Perfect. Well, just a reminder, everyone, if you do have any questions or something pops in your head later, you can always contact us directly. All of our information is on the website. Just feel free to reach out to us and we'll get back to you with an answer. We're going to end the webinar. Yep, go ahead, Chris.
It looks like John Young just asked a question.
Yep, John Young asked, will we be covering what building a stance is?
I don't think that's in any of the presentations on the definitions.
Yep, folks, we're strictly going over definitions in this round of rules webinars, but if you do have a more specific question, feel free to reach out to us directly via email and we can get back to you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone, again, and we'll see you next time.